Colts defense ranked poorly against the run last year, but don't get it twisted. Things are about to turn back around this year. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And let's hear it for our sponsor, Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. What's up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of HorseshoeHuddle.com. I'm your member of the Colts media, and we've got the meanest film analyst in the whole game right here joining us. And today we are continuing our chat about each position group with the Colts. On our most recent episode, we gave you the hog mollies, the interior offensive linemen. And now we're going to their counterparts today. That's the interior defensive linemen. So that group is obviously led by, it's really a two-horse race, DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. Obviously one of the more formidable duos in the league. I feel like we're getting a little homerish, Zach, calling, it feels like each group we have like a small sect of them that's among the best in the league. But certainly Buckner and Grover Stewart rank up there. They've got some guys behind them. Raekwon Davis, the newcomer from the Dolphins in free agency. Second-year mid-round pick, Adetomiwa Adebawore, who athletic freak, one of those big guys that is not supposed to move around like he does. And then Taven Bryan, Eric Johnson, and seventh-round pick, Jonah Laulu. So, Zach, we finally got a little drama last year with the Colts interior line. It had been business as usual for Buckner and Stewart for a few years. But then Stewart got popped for a performance-enhancing drug suspension, missed 6 games. He was missed.
Yes. Yes, he was very much missed. And I think it played a lot into his contract negotiation this offseason because I don't know about you guys, but I would have signed him for anything just to not watch what we watched when he was not out there last season. I mean, you put down the numbers right here when it comes to the run game with and without Grover Stewart. In games that Grover Stewart played, opposing teams averaged 29 carries a game for 107 yards. I don't have the math 100% on that, but I know that's under 4 yards a carry, so we're looking pretty good there. When you're looking at the 6 games without Grover Stewart, though, 32 carries for 153 yards a game against the Colts, and honestly, it felt like much worse than that. I'm actually shocked it was only 153 yards a game when Grover Stewart was in the lineup, because it really did feel like in that stretch. I mean, the New Orleans Saints were just running all over the Colts in that matchup. You're even looking at like the Patriots in that game without Grover. It was a rough showing. There was a lot of really, really bad moments without Grover Stewart. And the Colts were able to kind of go back on a little bit of a nice little run at the end when Grover Stewart got back up in the lineup. So, yeah, I mean, when you're looking at this duo, though, overall, when they're both on the field, it is just a fantastic duo. And it's kind of the perfect yin and yang when it comes to their play styles and just what they bring to the football field. DeForest Buckner, this fantastic pass rusher, does a lot of great things in the passing game. He's disruptive. He's got the long arms. He's got one of the most devastating pass rush moves in all of football with that swim. That swim move is just it's just fantastic seeing a 6'7" guy swimming around players with ease like that. Like, he creates so much separation and displacement with that swim move. Really, really fun defensive tackle to watch. And we're looking at one of the best eras of defensive tackle play. And DeForest Buckner is still one of those guys who's in that top 10 conversation every single year of his career. So just a major points to him for what he's able to bring to the Colts and just what he's able to do on the football field. And then Grover Stewart, arguably the biggest win of Chris Ballard's tenure as a GM. I mean, there's a guy who was drafted out of Albany State in round 4 of arguably Chris Ballard's worst draft class, that 2017 draft class when he first came in without all of his scouts in place, found a player like Grover Stewart, and Stewart has just climbed the NFL ladder from fringe roster player who didn't really play too much his first couple seasons to rotational guy to now being one of the best run stoppers in the entire league. Again, the numbers kind of speak for themselves when you're looking at them last year, but even if you're just going off vibes and you're just watching the games and just feeling it out. It feels like Grover Stewart makes one or two big plays in the run game every single week for the Colts. And a lot of them come on those 3rd and shorts and 4th and shorts. I mean, who's the guy who's eating up those double teams for EJ Speed to fly in there and tackle a dude short of the sticks on 4th and 1? It's typically Grover Stewart. So yeah, this duo is fantastic. I know they got some love from Pro Football Focus recently as one of the top duos in all of football in terms of defensive tackle duos. And I've loved watching these two guys the last couple of years. I mean, again, you really get just one of the best bromances in football. They just bring so much greatness to the interior defensive line. And even if when the Colts haven't been made the playoffs these last couple of years, we can still look at this duo as like, this is the building block for the Colts defense. If this Colts defense is going to turn it around and ever be like a top 10 or top 15 unit in the league, it starts and ends with these two guys doing what they do. And then hopefully the players around them can just accentuate that and really come into their own because that interior is locked down. But yeah, Buckner and Stewart, man, fantastic players. I love watching them every year. I could write about them every single week if I wanted to, because they're just such impact players. And it's just great to have two top tier players on the interior of your defensive line.
Yeah, you made a good point about that. So much of what those two guys do is also beneficial to their teammates, opening things up to them. You know, you kind of, a lot of people who have praised the Latu pick, for example, love the fact that he's going to be lining up next to DeForest Buckner. You know,
yeah,
like you can't double team everybody. You can't take attention, you know, away from everybody. So I think that's going to be big. We've obviously seen, you know, the Colts linebackers since Ballard has come in, and they've kind of had this, you know, these defensive systems. They've had Buckner and Stewart in there. The Colts linebackers almost always rank among tops in the leagues in tackles because of what the guys in front of them open up. You see Stewart go out, and then, you know, things start to spiral a little bit. Now, Buckner, he's only missed a couple games in his career, but the dude has dealt with like hella injuries, you know, the last couple of years. Like he's got like 4 or 5 different things that have popped up on the injury report. And, you know, he's made his starts. He's come in there, but just like we saw with Stewart missing time with the suspension, Buckner would be on like pitch counts. You know, yeah. He would play, but, you know, he was banged up enough to where he could only play, you know, 20 snaps or what it may be. And that's when teams smelled blood in the water and they would attack. So one of the biggest, I think, one of the biggest compliments that players can be given is how opponents react to them being on and off the field. And that's when they pounce on the opportunities, is when those guys just aren't in there. So yeah. They're also, there's Buckner's probably not still developing. Stewart is kind of still adding some things. Like he's getting slightly better as a pass rusher. Despite only playing in 11 games, had a career high in quarterback hits with 8. Pro Football Focus also gave him his highest grade of his career overall with a 76.2. But Buckner, even though, he's probably still in his prime, getting near the back end of his prime, but he just had his career high in tackles with 81, tied his career high in forced fumbles with 2, and had 7 pass breakups. When you've got a guy who's 6'7", you hope that he gets his hands in those passing lanes, which Buckner does. So there's just so many ways that these guys affect the game. And we've seen stretches where they are so dominant and like they can dictate a whole defensive performance just on their own, it seems. So it's what was the Colts that locked them both in together through 2026?
Yeah, so I was just going to mention that. Yeah, I was totally going to mention that.
Yeah, Buckner got his extension, and then like you mentioned, Stewart got re-signed this offseason. So the Colts know these guys work well together, and they want them still here for the long term.
Yeah, that's a huge point right there. And these two guys have the full support of the organization at this point. I mean, again, Stewart was hitting free agency, and we're not talking about this prime position where teams are just lining up to pay nose tackles. I know that they've gained a little bit more traction in recent years, but for the most part, nose tackles, pure run stopping nose tackles, aren't this like highly sought after position, but the Colts were quick to get Grover Stewart locked up for those 3 years. And then they didn't waste any time getting DeForest Buckner extended as well. That just shows how important these two players are to this defense and to this roster. The Colts wanted to lock those guys in for the next couple seasons and make sure that they're sticking around. So yeah, I mean, just to add to that you mentioned that there, just shows how important these two players are to everything the Colts are doing right now.
Yeah, so we obviously know who the leaders in the clubhouse are, but there's 4 or 5 guys right behind them that factor into this whole thing, but we maybe don't know how quite yet, but we'll discuss it here. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier, and emphasis on faster because I think it's going to be over pretty soon. Prices on the Gametime app actually begin to decrease the closer that it gets to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. They've got their last-minute deals, which means you save up to 60% off of buying last-minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. They are somewhere that allows you to be a procrastinator and rewards you for it. You got your zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats in that section for you. Again, we mentioned the views from the seat because obviously if you have a big pillar in your view, that's going to suck. And then the lowest price guarantee, which means Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find better price tickets in that same area on a competing site. I mentioned to you guys recently, this thing, it's legit. It works. My wife and I were looking for concert tickets the other day. They were a bit pricey. She didn't know where to really find them, so I told her to go on Gametime and hop on there, and boom, got our tickets for $20 off. So again, take the guesswork out of buying tickets to your events with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Jake, we're transitioning to our depth players on the defensive line, or their interior defensive line, rather. And I think one of the most important players to what the Colts defense is going to do this next season is Raekwon Davis. Now, I'm not saying that Raekwon Davis is this fantastic player, this player who is just a game changer or superstar player or anything like that. But I think when you look at the crux of the issue when it comes to the Colts defense last year, obviously we can look at the secondary, which we're going to talk about probably next week when we do that positional preview. But I think the other big issue obviously was those on-off splits with Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner to the backups. And we even saw when Stewart and Buckner were both healthy and on the field, Gus Bradley liked to rotate the interior of the defensive line. You know, there would be a couple series a game where the backup defensive tackles would be on the field. And like you said, that's blood in the water for the Sharks that are the other offense. I mean, they just want to run up the middle if you're going to have Taven Bryan and Eric Johnson out there, or Adetomi Adebawore in there on run defense. So a player like Raekwon Davis not only adds to that second unit to where those guys are actually kind of playable because you have a big body who can just hold his own there, but also it gives you a chance to give DeForest Buckner even more rest throughout the game. Like you mentioned with Buckner in the first segment, he's kind of in the twilight of his prime at this point. Still a fantastic player, still in his prime, still a player you want on the field as much as possible. But with a player like Raekwon Davis, maybe you can cut Buckner's snaps from 80% or 75% down to 60%. 65%, more so to what Grover Stewart's snaps are. You know, Grover Stewart, mostly being a rundown guy, is getting like 45, 50, 55% of the snaps. Maybe you can keep Buckner a little bit fresher for those week 16, 17, and 18 games, and hopefully playoff games by getting him off the field a little bit more on rundowns early in the season. You can roll with Raekwon Davis and with Grover Stewart on some snaps and give Buckner the rest that he needs so he can be 100% on pass rush downs where he makes his bread and butter. So I think Raekwon Davis, again, we're not talking about players who are star players by any means, but when you're looking at backup players on this roster, I think he's one of the more important players because of what he can do to just alleviate the stress on those two top guys in front of him in Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner.
Yeah, and I don't think you need someone who's like uber productive statistically back there. You just need someone who's not going to be a liability, which we saw last year. The Colts really weren't prepared for anything to happen to Stewart or Buckner. I mean, they had Taven Bryan back there, and they probably relied on Eric Johnson too much. Johnson, of course, is someone who they'd really kind of hinted at they wanted to be their next Grover Stewart after they drafted him. But he just wasn't ready really for a marquee role. And then so that forced Taven Bryan to be played out of position. He's an okay backup 3-tech, but he is not a suitable fill-in for a Grover Stewart at the 1-tech. So guys playing out of position just wasn't good. Raekwon Davis has got that size. Again, not a super productive player by any means statistically, but he's not going to get bullied around, and he's going to keep his spot. I don't know how disruptive he's going to be going upfield in a system like this, but again, I don't think you really need it. He can do some things. I mean, he just had his career high in tackles for loss last year and quarterback hits. And if you're just relying on that guy to get a handful of snaps per game and maybe be a lifeline if something happens to one of those guys like Buckner or Stewart, that's fine. But I mean, you have the size and the strength now that you didn't have last year. And then so the other guy that factors into this is Adetomiwa Adebawore, who you really hope takes a step up, who you're looking for him to take the step that they didn't really get with Eric Johnson last year, because it was Johnson's second year and just kind of fell flat. So this is Ade's second year. But this guy, again, physical, athletic freak. Like, what did he run in the 40 at? Like, whatever. Like, his size and speed and athleticism, it does not make sense, really. Yeah. Like, he truly was doing things that, like, guys that big are not allowed to do.
Yeah, 6'1", 282 at the combine. Really weird profile. Shorter guy.
Short and heavy, but super long arms.
Yep, super long arms, and then he ran a 4.49 is what it was.
Yeah, that's bonk. That's like Anthony Richardson's speed, but like in the shape of a bowling ball. Right. Or like whatever that boulder Pokemon is with the really long arms, like that's Ade.
Oh yeah, we got Graveler, we got Golem, whoever. Yes. Geodude, you can even go Geodude, a little smaller.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. He's the boulder with the long arms. That's Ade. And I hope that sticks from here on out.
There you go. He is kind of like a Geodude. We got to give him Graveler so he's evolved a little bit there. But
perfect.
To really show the speed, though, I mean, Adetomiwa was running down on kickoffs on times last year. I think he recorded a tackle on kick coverage against the Carolina Panthers in that week where he actually had like a sack and a half in that game against the Panthers. So doing it on defense and special teams in the short time he got. But I think a big thing for Adetomiwa, and something that I kind of have in mind with him, is we're looking at this Colts pass rush right now, and we're thinking really good things. Buckner's coming back. You got Dio and Tyquan Lewis out there, Kwity Paye, Laiatu, Samson Ebukam. Like, this is a good pass rush, a good and deep pass rush. And Adetomiwa kind of feels like that thing where, you have your ice cream flavor that you really like, and you have everything that you like and all these toppings, but there's like one extra topping where it's like, if they have it, cool, I'll throw it on there, it'd be great. But if they don't have it, like, it's still a good ice cream sundae or ice cream snack, whatever the heck you're going for. That's what Adetomiwa is. It's this ultimate like wild card where it's like, if they have it, awesome. I'm loving it right here. Like, this is perfect. But if they don't have it, like, it's still going to be good. If he can be, a rotational 3-tech who gives you 200 snaps this year total, like whatever it's going to be, like 200 snaps, but he can be effective as a pass rusher in those snaps. Oh, we're cooking. This is the perfect ice cream sundae, but even if he doesn't develop into that this year, it's still not the end of the world. Like, they still have so many good pass rushers that they can throw at opposing teams and do some good things with. But for his sake, I'm hoping that he can get out there, see a couple more snaps this year than what he did last year, get out there on some passing downs and showcase that speed and athleticism. He's got the motor, he's got the strength, he's got the intangibles. It really comes down to the development and just what he's doing from the interior. But Adetomiwa, I think he's the guy we're rooting for the most in this battle in the defensive tackle room, because the upside is just so immensely high with him. And we saw the flashes last year and obviously on his college film as well. So if he can get out there and showcase that he took a step this offseason, that would just be the ultimate topper to this perfect ice cream sundae we have on the Colts defensive line.
Ade is Oreos. That's what
he's Oreos. Yeah, whatever it's gonna. You can Oreos, Snickers, like whatever you want it to be. Like whatever's your perfect topping on your ice cream. That's what Adetomi can be.
That's a whole new segment that I wish we could get into. But no, I think that's. I don't know if I want to say it makes him have like a high floor or whatever, but guys like Ade, he's kind of got the Kwity Paye and Dio thing where he's going to be productive because of that motor.
Yeah,
like he doesn't just totally get stifled because he has that motor in place of the whistle and has that athleticism. You're always going to see him somewhat around near the end of the play. So he's going to be the one where the quarterback's rolling out and then someone slaps his ankles and gets the sack, at the end of the play. That's Ade. He may not, he's maybe not going to be that big disruptor right off the bat in year two. I don't expect that, but I expect because of the motor that he's going to be a little more productive than he was in his rookie year.
Yeah, and one more thing that we can add to this really quick is we have no clue how he's going to factor into the new special teams rules, the new kickoff rules. Like, he could be an absolute terror in the way that these things are shaping up with the new special teams rules, but it really comes down to what it looks like in camp. So I'm really excited to see what that is because, man, a 282-pound guy who runs a 4.4 on these kickoff rules, like, I feel like that's a pretty big, like, asset right there, but we'll see what that looks like in camp. But coming up, guys, we're going to transition from, these were our two X factors we're both really excited about. Now it's three guys we're not as excited about, but they still factor into this race here for the defensive tackle depth on the Colts roster. All right, Jay, it's time to talk Taven Bryan and Eric Johnson. And I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think of these two players on the Colts roster is just missed opportunity last year. Maybe not as much for Taven Bryan because Taven Bryan, we kind of know what he is at this point. Like, he's been in the NFL for a long time, and everything he gave the Colts last year is kind of what you would expect when the Colts did sign him. Like, did some decent things as a pass rusher, had, a forced fumble in there, a couple sacks. Like, it wasn't a good run defender. Like, we expected this coming in. But the player who had the biggest opportunity to earn himself some money and some playing time in the NFL last year was Eric Johnson. He had this massive, massive chance when Grover Stewart was knocked out with that suspension, and he just didn't capitalize on it. It just wasn't a good showing from him. I think there were some flashes in there where, you could see what he could be, but it's just not close to where it needs to be. And we're at the point now where, again, you got Adetomi on this roster. You got Jonah Luwalu on this roster where it's like, these guys are probably more promising at this point. So Eric Johnson kind of needs to have a great camp, or I could see him being on the chopping block by the end of the offseason.
Yeah, I agree. It is kind of a missed opportunity there. And he is still developing. I think they thought he would be like a 2 or 3 year project, but you would hope to see him a little farther along. And he does show flashes. Mostly I've seen in like training camp practices and one-on-ones. Like, he does have strength and explosive ability. It's just about actually doing it in a game setting, line versus line. Like, the game isn't played one-on-one. So that's definitely, it is a big summer for him. It kind of feels like Ben Banigou where the time's just running out, but Banigou was super productive in practice.
Yeah.
So you need something from Johnson to justify, because it's finally a numbers game where they don't need him to make the roster at this point. Like, they've kind of got guys ahead of him now that are suitable to play. And then when you look at Taven Bryan, I agree. Like, you kind of just know what you're getting. Like, in his intended role, it's probably fine, but you really hope Ade takes that spot this year.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we doing otherwise? I mean, when you've got guys who aren't full-time starters from the defensive line, they're only playing like a handful of snaps. It's hard to judge like how productive they're being. So I just looked at like the Pro Football Focus metrics on them. Bad, not good. It was the worst grade of Bryan's career, and Johnson was like perhaps one of the lowest grades I've ever seen. Like, it was not great for them. So I mean, Bryan obviously had to make 7 starts, filling in for Grover and Buck when they were banged up. But Johnson had 265 snaps, was in 14 games, did have 15 tackles. But yeah, you just need more from him, especially when the Colts set the expectation of bringing up Grover Stewart multiple times after they drafted him. Now, Grover is a special case, and he's probably exceeded expectations from when he was drafted, but like anything more than what has been shown so far, that is improvement.
Yeah. And I will say with Grover, I remember like by year 3, because I think that Johnson just finished his 3rd year with the Colts, I believe, right? I think it was his second year. Okay, yeah. So 2nd year with the Colts. By this point, I think Stewart was further along than what Johnson was. But really, it was that year 3 to 4 range for Stewart where he really took off. I want to say it was Stewart's 3rd season. Yeah, I think it was his 3rd season going into 2020. Where I was at a training camp. I got out there for a week, and obviously you were out there all the time. And we saw Grover Stewart going against Quentin Nelson in one-on-ones. And it was like, oh, like, holy crap. Like either Quentin Nelson is just not Quentin Nelson anymore, or this Grover kid is ready to go. And it turns out, Grover Stewart was ready to go. So, I mean, like the book is not closed on Eric Johnson by any means. Like, you can see this adjustment that happens for nose tackles in the league. And maybe it takes until year 3 or 4, like it did with Stewart, where Stewart wasn't Grover Stewart until that 3rd or 4th season in the NFL. But like you mentioned, the time is running out. Like if we're looking at an hourglass right now, with the last couple dots of sand are just going through right now. So it really comes down to what he does in camp. Can he beat out guys like Adetomi and Taven Bryan in camp and earn that 4th or 5th roster spot at defensive tackle? Because like you said, it's not like a thing like last year where it's like, well, if all these guys are underperforming, we're still going to keep Eric Johnson because we don't have other guys. They have other guys this year. They have a 7th round pick, which we're going to talk about in a second, that they really, really like. And I feel like they would almost rather have Jonah Luwalu be a healthy scratch type player all season long rather than keeping a guy like Eric Johnson if they're not going to play him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because Laulu is a guy that I'm assuming was a projection pick, like a developmental pick. If he makes the roster, great, but my assumption is that the intention all along was for him to be a practice squad guy that they could develop for a year or two, because he had all that time at Hawaii and then went to Oklahoma, bounced around positions, finally seemed to find kind of a fit last year with Oklahoma, but they've got to get him in kind of, I don't want to say a niche role, but like have him focus on a couple main things and acclimate to the NFL, obviously do their body composition stuff, get him for the role they want, to get his body type how they want it, and then just focus on like the key aspects of what they want him to do. I don't think they expect him to contribute right away. I mean, if he does, that's awesome. I mean, he's got good size and everything. He's shown some versatility in college. But I feel like that's a guy, if he comes and knocks you off the roster, that's kind of damning.
Yeah. Well, and the big thing too to remember is, when it comes down to game day inactives, the Colts like to keep a good 4 or 5 guys on the roster who they have no intention of playing.
Yeah.
To where if it came down to those guys actually getting on the football field, they would call up someone from the practice squad to play over them. They do this every single year. They've done it with Will Fries during his rookie season. They did it with Isaiah Land mostly last year. They do this with, Sam Ehlinger has always been this type of role on the team. They have intentions for this, for players like that. So
they did it early in Dallas Flowers' career too, because he made the roster and then they brought up Brown. I can't think of
Tony Brown.
Tony Brown.
Yeah.
To play it when Flowers was already on the roster. So
Yeah, exactly. The Colts do this with young players where it's like, look, we don't want to lose you, but you're not ready, so we're going to keep you on the roster and just, you can learn by watching everything. That's a role on this team. And I think if it comes down to it, like if Adetomi has a great camp and he's defensive tackle 4, and you're looking at him and Raekwon Davis, those guys are locked in. They're going to have a role as the backup defensive tackles. If they're looking at defensive tackle 5 and they're saying, hey, look, one of these guys has to be a game day inactive, who are they going to keep out of these 3 guys? They're going to keep the player that they actually believe in with upside going forward. And then they can just throw like a Taven Bryan on the practice squad to call up if it ever comes down to it, or even an Eric Johnson. Like, I don't know if these guys would be claimed by other teams, but they would keep Luwalu over those guys because there's some upside there. So I wouldn't rule him out as being a guy who can make the roster just because the Colts have done this in years past with players they like, especially with late day 3 players they like. I mean, Will Mallory was that for most of last year before injuries forced him into the lineup and he was able to show what he could do.
Yeah, Isaiah Land as well, like you mentioned. I kind of like that idea though of keeping Laulu and Johnson around, one of them on the practice squad, like, because they're still developmental guys. And again, we've always talked about interior defensive line being such a tough position. Like, it's one of the longest developing positions from rookie year, even if you're like an early round pick. Like, those guys aren't always automatic hits. So, I mean, I'm not out on Johnson. I'm cool with them still developing him, but like, they need to see something. So yeah, I think Taven Bryan almost feels like the Mo Alley Cox discussion we had the other day.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
If he's still there, it's because the young guys did not step up.
Right. And yeah, I think you said it perfect. I don't think I can really add anything to that there. So you guys let us know in the comments section, what is your feeling if Taven Bryan makes this roster? Are you guys excited? Are you doing front flips, back flips, jumping jacks, whatever? Let us know in the comment section. And before we get out of here, let me remind you guys that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now also available on the Amazon Fire TV app and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. And if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, at ZachHicks2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love you guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon talking defensive ends. It's going to be a fun one, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.